All right, well, hello and welcome everyone. My name, for those who don't know, I am Casey Dunn, and I'm the Assistant Director for Employer Relations here at Marquette University's Career Services Center. And I'm pleased to welcome you to today's session, Neurodiversity at Work, How to Attract and Accommodate Neurodivergent Talent. Today, we're going to see an overview presentation to get everyone on the same page about what neurodiversity is, and then we'll dive deeper with a panel discussion, and we'll wrap up with a live Q&A. And just a couple of housekeeping items before I turn things over to our session facilitator for the day. The first thing, today's session is being recorded, and we'll absolutely share that recording with folks who are on the call afterwards. And a reminder that this is the 5th session in our ongoing series surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in the workplace and in the recruiting pipeline. So if you're interested in viewing any of those past sessions, they're all on our YouTube channel, and I'll also drop the link in the chat here. Today, we are inviting all audience members to turn your cameras on. If you're in a place where you're able to do so, it's always nice to see people's faces during these presentations. But that said, if you're in the audience, please do keep your microphone on mute unless you're asking a question during the Q&A portion. If you have any questions, either during the presentation or during the panel, please feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to those during the Q&A. And with that, I want to introduce today's session facilitator, Emily Raclaw, who's the director of Marquette University's On Your Marq program. It's a program that supports Marquette students who are autistic to ensure that they are set up for success and feel a sense of belonging here on campus. And just a shout out that Emily was recognized by the university president, Michael Lovell, for being a Marquette difference maker last year. So Emily, thank you so much for leading today's session. And with that, I'll turn things over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Casey. When I was coming up with this overview presentation, I was consulting with a colleague and friend of mine, and I was like, no, you have to do it. Your ideas are brilliant. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Rose Curley, who is a consultant, writer, and educator. She has taught courses that explore identity, representation, and narrative at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. And she currently works as a consultant for a creative agency in Los Angeles. Rose is a person who decides what language is used when marketing movies, television shows that present marginalized stories. We have brought her in to speak about neurodiversity and how to integrate disability into initiatives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And with that, I introduce you to Rose Curley.
Hello, I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation to show you, but first I wanted to introduce myself as neurodivergent, and I'm going to give you an idea of what that means just in case you don't. So neurodiversity includes autism. I am autistic, but it includes a lot of other conditions, including mental health conditions and different neurotypes. So autism is a neurotype. And you can look more into this, but mainly I'm here to show you how neurodivergent employees or consultants like me can help see things differently. And so with this presentation, I'm going to be zooming out on diversity, equity, inclusion, and inclusion initiatives, and show you what I see in my experience. In my experience, I am also, oh, there was some feedback. Okay, I think we're okay. I am also speaking as someone who has been a student, who has benefited from these programs and also fought these programs. So I'm taking a critical approach while offering you some advice and introducing you to neurodiversity. Share the screen. So some autistic traits, can everyone see?
Sure can.
Yes, Rose.
Great. So some autistic traits that people may or may not know about are that we are typically going to have special interests. And so I wanted to make sure that you know that having special interests is something that has been discouraged among autistic people, but that we have found that we can use our special interests or tap into them in our careers, and that it's best if we are not discouraged, but rather encouraged to embrace them. So if you're interviewing a prospective autistic employee, I recommend asking them what their special interests are and if there is a way to accommodate their special interests for the benefit of the company or whatever their position is. Another thing that I want you to take away is that we are honest. Being honest doesn't always mean that we're right, but it can be counterproductive and cause a lot of confrontation to assume that an autistic person is lying, because we're also very bad at proving that we're not lying, just because we can get very anxious about it. So these are just some things that I wanted to throw out there. We can be good at finding patterns, pointing out flaws in systems, which is what I'm about to do. I have done a lot of speech therapy and other forensic training that has helped me with my tone and trying to match what I'm expressing. But generally, another autistic trait is mismatching tone and expression. So I'm going to advise you to take what we say literally. It's not that we don't mean what we say. It's that you might have misinterpreted what we say, because to neurotypical people or non-neurodivergent people tend to place more emphasis on the way things are said than what is literally said. So when you're approaching autistic people and interacting with autistic people, remember that we are generally going to be literal in our communication and literal in the reception of communication. We can have awkward timing. We can have vocal and physical tics and repetitive behavior that is self-stimulating. We call it stimming. I'm like, screenshot these or look more into these things on your own. But one thing that I'm here to tell you today about neurodiversity is that this is a lot of conditions. It's a big umbrella. And I don't advise diversity, equity, and inclusion programs to attempt to educate everybody about everything. But you can change your approach, and you can encourage a new mindset, which is that we are coming with a new perspective. And one of my favorite examples is John Nash, who went to Princeton to study math, physics, and economics. And in this clip, I'm going to show you an example of this representation, this film. They illustrate a new economic system that he proposed that's now called the Nash equilibrium. Oops. Come on. Oh.
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adams.
Uh-oh.
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics.
In competition, individual ambition serves
Can
the common
everyone
good.
hear it? Because I think my microphone...
We can hear it.
You can hear it, Rose.
Okay, good.
Exactly.
Every man for himself, gentlemen.
And those who strike out are...
Ugh, sorry.
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics.
In competition, individual ambition serves the common good.
Exactly.
Every man for himself, gentlemen.
And those who strike out are stuck with their friends.
And I'm not gonna strike out.
You can lead a blonde to water, but you can't make a drink.
I don't think you said
All
that.
right, nobody move. She's looking over here. Right, she's looking at Nash.
Oh, God. All right, he may have the upper hand now, but wait until he opens his mouth. Remember the last time?
Oh, yes, that was one for the history books.
Adam Smith needs revision.
What are you talking about?
If we all go for the blonde, we block each other. not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends. But they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice. But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way, and we don't insult the other girls. That's the only way we win. That's the only way we all get laid. Adam Smith said, the best result comes from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself, right? That's what he said, that's right? Incomplete. Incomplete. Okay? Because the best result would come from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself and the group.
Ash, this is some way for you to get the blonde on your own. You can go to hell. Governing dynamics, gentlemen. Governing dynamics. Adam Smith. What's wrong?
Yep, here we go. Careful, careful.
Thank you.
Okay. So John Nash was schizophrenic, and so that makes him neurodivergent. But I love this example because this is what I'm trying to do here. So looking at your existing diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, why are we here? We're here because we want to educate people to fill gaps in their knowledge. We want to provide support systems to combat stereotypes and change broken systems. But how do we do that? Well, typically each aspect of identity is taken in isolation. And the idea is to focus on them. But by separating these issues, that means people who are marginalized for more than one reason are excluded from each group to which they belong. So if we are having an event or an info session like this one about being neurodivergent, are we also talking about women's issues? Are we talking about students of color? If we're at a university like Marquette where we're helping neurodivergent students, are we talking about race? Are we talking about physical disability? Are we talking about queer neurodivergent students? So each of these is separated, and I'm saying that that is problematic, but I understand why. What happens when we separate these issues is that we end up comparing individuals to our ideas of what these identities are. And so I'm calling those authenticity arguments. When a person states their identity, it's compared to examples of that identity. I've told you I'm autistic, and if your only idea of someone autistic is that they can't speak, you may think and or say, well, you can speak, so you're not autistic. These examples range from personal relationships. Maybe they know someone who is a non-speaking autistic, and or maybe they've seen a movie or a television show and they're basing their ideas on that representation. So reactions to these identities that challenge whether the person matches the preconceived notions reveal bias. And these authenticity arguments always revolve around one or more of these four things. And there are additional issues like ageism, but these four things are what I've decided to focus on in marginalized groups that are addressed in these initiatives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. You see how they go hand in hand too, ableism and misogyny. If misogyny is hatred of women, and the hatred is at the root, the fear of being weak or identifying weakness as associated with femininity, that's also able. So, and you can see how racism and xenophobia are associated with and grouped by colorism. So when we look at these marginalized groups, as I said, they're separate, but few people only belong to one of them. So at the Meeting for Women, We're going to also have queer women. We're going to have disabled women. We're going to have neurodivergent women, but we're still centering women. So to talk about any of these other issues is considered complexifying it and complicating the message. So everything comes second to another thing, and it gets very complicated. So I wanted to see if I could use math to figure out how many different identities there are under this umbrella of marginalized groups that are addressed in these initiatives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. End up with this shape that is actually called a complete graph. And so I talked to some of my math friends, and they explained to me that there are 256 combinations of different identities according to this map, and that actually only 255 would be included because the 256th option would be to not belong to any of these groups. So then I asked, inclusion in what? What is it? What are the opposites of these? If you don't belong to any of these groups, what is the identity of that person? So where there could be one person who belongs to all of these groups. I belong to most of these groups, but I'm not an immigrant, and I wasn't raised non-Christian. So there is someone who belongs to all of these groups, and there's someone who belongs to all of the inverse of these groups. And so then I thought, well, if this is one person and not belonging to any one of these groups means you are marginalized, then our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are for everyone except this one person. And I feel the need to make that absolutely clear here, because that's not what I'm saying. And this is my neurodivergent perspective that I hope you will see as not just an asset, because I've been brought here to prove that being disabled isn't going to negatively affect the quality of my work. But I'm here to tell you that that is what I've been pushed to prove as every kind of marginalized person, being a woman, being genderqueer, being having a hidden physical disability, being neurodivergent, being Black, all of these things. I have noticed that we are saying the same things, and at the same time, because of these authenticity arguments, we are encouraged to compare our oppression and see each other as different. And there's also been a lot of talk about hierarchies of privilege and oppression, and the idea that, say, a Black woman is more oppressed than a queer white woman. And so I'm saying there are 255 possibilities here. And so I don't see the need to educate you about 255 combinations of identities, but rather see the commonality. Another commonality is that this is the most overrepresented protagonist in narratives, and those narratives extend to commercials that you see, print advertising over the past 150 years in this country and the world now. So to be any one of these things is to be underrepresented. And I'm arguing that that is the core problem when it comes to the bias incidents in workplaces and universities. Even though this identity has been identified as having what has been called the most privilege, I also want you to walk away with the awareness that this identity has been most overrepresented in such a way that able-bodied or non-disabled, neurotypical white American Christian, cisgender, heterosexual men have been the most likely to commit suicide, And suicide statistics are something that we always bring up in diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, because we are trying to get people to care. But getting people to care does not amount to showing them how universal an issue is or how common an identity is. This is a perfect example, because most people are not non-disabled, neurotypical white American Christian cisgender heterosexual men, but most of our familiarity is with their stories. And so that can make those who do identify as that feel like their life is meaningless. And it can make them feel like everybody else has a reason, a societal oppressive reason, an outside force that is other than them, even though that may not be the truth. That is how this character, this so overrepresented character, can be feeling. So as we move forward and we watch everybody try to unpack these issues, I wanted to zoom out and show the ways that these things are grouped, the way that these labels and identities enforce each other and work against each other in our current society. And so it does all come back to authenticity arguments. And those authenticity arguments are actually the same for the non-disabled, neurotypical, white American, Christian, cisgender, heterosexual man, according to who that person is, how they appear to be, how they behave, in comparison to the monolithic ideas that we have from the stories that we've consumed. And it does all come back to ableism, racism, misogyny, and xenophobia. So those are the 4 big ones that I recommend keeping in mind. Regarding disability, ableism, each of these things is internalized. So that overrepresentation of the able-bodied, the white, the male, it doesn't mean that we can't identify with those stories. Really, we identify with any protagonist despite their identity. The overrepresentation of it has made it familiar to all of us. So now that I'm done with my presentation, just wanted to get back on camera here. Sorry if I ran a few minutes over.
You're good.
But so I just wanted to say that given all of what I've said, it's very important for me to state that I was about 24, 25 years old before I realized the ways that I had been conditioned to be ableist, to be racist, to be xenophobic, to be misogynistic. And so I had to examine my own language and my own motivations. And one of those things, I'm just going to tell one story. When I was in speech therapy as a child, from kindergarten through elementary school, I was very motivated to change my speech patterns, and I used tongue depressors and everything because the kids were calling me retarded and they were calling me weetawed, like according to my speech impediment. So I used that anger as motivation. And that is ableist. So even though it can sound like I'm combating a stereotype and that I'm a success story, I'm like, we don't need that. And I just need to remind you that basic ass neurotypical people have jobs. We don't need to exceed those standard expectations, and every marginalized group is asking for that. Permission to be average.
Thanks, Rose. I always love hearing you talk.
Thanks.
So
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Rose and I go way back, and I'm just very excited to have her here. So we're going to move into our panel presentation. I'm going to have my panel take a moment to introduce themselves. Everyone knows Rose. Milo, can I have you go first? Introduce yourself.
Oh, geez, sure. I'm Milo. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a junior at Marquette studying education studies.
Perfect. Milo is also one of my students in my program, and I asked them to participate in this thing because they have a pretty extensive work history, and I thought it'd be good to contribute to this conversation. Jakeem, I'll have you go next. We can't hear you. I can hear you. Oh. Can't hear you. Nope. Hold on. I'll let you fix that. I'm gonna skip to Bridget real quick.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget. I use she, her pronouns. I am an employee at Neurodiversity in the Workplace. We're a nonprofit based out of Philadelphia, but we work nationally that works with companies to create more inclusive hiring programs for neurodivergent job seekers and employees, and really focused on skill-based hiring practices and reducing the emphasis on social fit and traditional forms of communication when folks are hiring. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much, Rose, for that presentation. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Bridget. Jakeem, let's see.
Am I good to go?
Yes, now we can hear you. Sorry.
All right. Apologies. No, it's an honor to be a part of this panel discussion. Jakeem here, current Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Outreach Manager with your reigning 2021 NBA champions, Milwaukee Bucks. Healthy Chris Middleton. We talk about back-to-back championships, but I lead pretty much our diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and programming across the organization. I oversee our recruitment and hiring for part-time, full-time positions, including internships as well, just overall employee experience.
Awesome, thank you. Casey, I'm gonna make you my timekeeper for this next part. I forgot to tell you that. Okay, so for Rose and Milo, what are some accommodations that have been most helpful for you at work?
I can go first. Job security. And I'm a consultant. I'm an independent contractor, so that by like it's in its own right does not have job security, but I get reassurance that I am valued, and I'm allowed to turn down projects. So a lot of people, especially in the entertainment industry and other high stakes industries, it's like, oh, you have to say yes, because if you say no, they'll just go to someone else who will say yes all the time. But they value what I have to do. And so I can say, I don't have the spoons for this project, but offer me something else in a few weeks. And they will.
For me, well, I'm not much of a big shot. I've done entry-level work at, grocery stores, and my first job was at Cousins. I'd say the biggest thing was just like changing positions or like taking on a role that like is better suited to my skill set. My first manager actually kind of just like clocked me as an autistic person. I wasn't really like aware of the implications and like what that would mean for me as an employee back then. I was like 16. And she kind of just had me be like the designated cleaner, and that worked great for me because like it involved a lot less multitasking. It was like less hectic. It was very task oriented. I got to work at my own pace. And at my current job, I work at a grocery store now. For a long time, I was a cashier, which is like extremely exhausting for me. And being allowed to like work in other departments, kind of just like bounce back and forth. And now I'm in produce, and it's just like a vastly better fit for me. Again, it's task oriented. It's just works a lot better for me than having to like constantly just like be idle and like interact with other people. It's like very draining for me. And moving over has made all the difference.
Yeah, I worked in the office where I was doing data entry, and that was great, but I had to talk to people in the copy room randomly sometimes, but like definitely every day I was going to run into someone. And I understand how it sounds to neurotypical people, but having to talk about the weather every day at any moment to someone, like the same people every day, small talk for autistic people is so draining. I would have to drink coffee afterward. And I was just like, this is so dumb. Why is this what is making my entire job harder? Like that it's Wisconsin. How much does the weather change? Like it's whatever season it is, it's the season. I don't know. But so yeah, there are a lot of accommodations don't have to be like that big, like a big shift. A lot of time the little things really make a big difference.
Thanks. Okay, so to everybody, what are some recommendations you have to improve hiring processes that you participated in, whether from the employee side or the employer side?
Yeah, so I'll take that question. I think for us, so we use a platform called Textio, where before any job description is posted, whether it's an internship, part-time, or full-time job opportunity, that it eliminates the bias information and it has more so inclusive information. So that way we're more intentional on who we're hiring. So when Rose talk about those marginalized groups, those are the groups that we really want to target and be more intentional of creating the right talent pipelines, like myself being able to work with, a Marquette University and different organizations across the community and country, really being able to get us the right talent that we're looking for to make up of the right demographics that we know is in need. So 2021, we were ranked the #1 NBA team in regards to the most quality and inclusive job postings. And once we really started using that software, we see an uptick in the talent that's being able to apply for those opportunities. So people are not discouraged for applying, especially when you talk about a NBA team, and a lot of people from all across the world are applying for a lot of these opportunities. So it is discouraging because you're thinking about, maybe I'm not going to get this opportunity. What's the culture like there? So we want to really brand ourselves and have a culture of belonging, for people to apply for our opportunities, and even throughout the interview process, being able to, in a sense, over communicate on, what accommodations do you need, making the environment more comfortable for the person during the interview process, letting them know beforehand, hey, this is who you're interviewing with. It's a panel. Do you feel comfortable? What are the accommodations that you need? And even at events throughout the community that we do, we hand out interview prep things as well on what it's like to interview at the Bucks too.
Okay, thank you. Bridget, I know you have something to say.
Yeah, that was awesome. I wanted to follow up on that because that was in part what I was going to say, which was the transparency and increasing transparency in what the interview process is like, by letting like Jakeem said, like these are the questions we're going to ask you during this interview, giving that ahead of time. These are the people that are going to be there, and making it, like increasing that transparency. So you're not walking in totally blind to this interview, which is already an extremely anxiety producing situation. So that's part of it. I think in terms of a more cultural or systemic shift, it's moving away from that traditional interview process at all and looking less at, oh, can we chit chat in this interview? Oh, you went to this school, oh, you know this person, oh, me too, yeah, cool, you're hired. And we know, like research shows, not just for neurodivergent folks, but for everyone, that looking at skills and doing some sort of skill or technical based project-based interview is a more effective way to hire, and a more effective way to find employees that are actually able to do the roles of the job, right? So shifting away from that and shifting more into that technical side of things, that skill base. What are the actual skills that this person is going to need for this job, and how can I have them demonstrate that? So those are my thoughts.
And I would even add in, like, I know for, most of the people that we know who's going to be interviewing candidates for a part-time or full-time job opportunity internship is more so conversational. Like, we already know your experience on paper. It's more so getting to know the person. What are you passionate about? What are you looking for, in this opportunity? So it's more so of those questions and not really the stressful questions that people would, typically, have anxiety about, answering.
Well, and I think in that moment, that's where I suggested that if you know that you're interviewing somebody autistic, ask the special interest question. But also what Bridget was saying, yeah, it's a big problem. Obviously, there's something that humans can see that a computer can't see, right? But there's obviously a problem across the board when likability outweighs skill set and experience. And sure, yeah, working with people is important. Having letters of recommendation and people to vouch for you is important. It is more difficult for neurodivergent people to develop those relationships, and it's not necessarily because we're not good at our jobs. So it's true about neurodiversity, but that likability factor is when we're not always aware that, oh, you like this person more because you see yourself in them. And you see them as like, a father-son relationship, and you get all nostalgic about it, and you may even project or mother-daughter or other, things that are unprofessional. It's unprofessional to place weight and importance and project ability, but also to value certain things as like, contributing to a company when it's not really.
Yeah. Milo, I know you just went through an interview process. Do you have anything to add to the conversation about that and how that was? I know that one is a little bit different than typical interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed for a summer camp position recently, and it was like, it felt vastly better than like any other interview I've done, because like Bridget was saying, I think it was very transparent. They gave me all the questions ahead of time, and I was like ready to answer them. And it like made all the difference. I like felt like way more prepared. I was able to prepare effectively. And I just felt like really comfortable, it wasn't nearly as anxiety inducing as like most other interviews. And oh gee, what else was I gonna say? I think just like discussing, like I don't really always feel comfortable like discussing that like I'm neurodivergent like during the interview process, because it's just like, well, like what if they like just drop me, because I like say something that's like, oh well, my skill set doesn't really like fulfill the role, which obviously I want to be mindful of. There could be just like even if I just like fulfill like fill out like on like an application like I'm disabled or like whatever, like they just like don't ask me about it, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna like talk about it. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that like it's not enough to say we don't care about that. I mean, there have been places where I started work and I told them I'm autistic, and they're like, oh yeah, that doesn't matter to us. And they think that that's the solution, because they think the problem is that it seems like it matters to them. And I'm like, no, I'm autistic. That means that you shouldn't, it may actually cost you money or delay things if you're sarcastic with me.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's a really good transition to our next question, because with what you're saying about employers and how they're like, okay, whatever. So for Jakeem and Bridget, then what are some strategies that you both have used to include when people are disclosing that they're neurodivergent or autistic into your at your organization? How have you worked to include that in your diversity efforts? I changed the question a little bit. Sorry, guys.
Okay. Do you want to start?
Oh, Bridget. Yeah, you can start.
Okay. I think the first thing is to let employers know, like, your company, your team is already neurodiverse, right? Like, it's not like there aren't neurodivergent people on your team, right? They're already there. It's coming up with strategies and looking at your, sorry, there's an airplane if you can hear that, looking at what you're doing or not doing to support neurodivergent employees. Like Rose was just saying, this can cost you money, and unfortunately we know for companies, bottom line is going to be financial in most situations. So it is like, okay, it's going to be less expensive for you to implement certain accommodations, which most of accommodations are free. And if they're not free, usually there's a one-time cost of under $500. And so that's less expensive than you having to go and hire a whole new employee, and it's less time consuming. So I think in some ways you have to kind of make that business case. But I think it's also what we've really found is finding the employees at companies that care about this, and that's ideally includes employees that are neurodivergent at that company already, and hearing those voices, folks that also have connections to neurodivergence and neurodiversity, and kind of like, we don't want to put all like the weight on them, but kind of making sure those voices are heard. And starting with some companies, it can unfortunately be like, not unfortunately, but it can be a slow process. So it can start with these conversations, with trainings, with things like that. And then as companies start to feel like, okay, I'm kind of like know what neurodivergence is, I'm starting to understand, we're kind of incorporating this more into our culture. It's like, okay, now let's make those big shifts, right? Like now let's do it. And so that's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of what we've found.
I think that's a great answer. Just to kind of piggyback off that, is that culture is everything, leadership is everything. It starts at the top. I think here with us, we definitely have, it's a fast-paced working environment. Every day really doesn't look the same, but it starts at the top, understanding that, yes, we have business goals to meet, but ensuring that not only our players, but our front office staff, full-time, part-time, that you're in a good space mentally, spiritually, physically. How can we put you first? We've implemented, we have unlimited PTO just through the off season. We have, giving team members every other Friday off. We started like not only as a whole, as an organization, we consider ourselves a Bucks family. So as a whole, we do mental health, therapy, not only just we are understanding what team members go through in their personal lives, their everyday lives at work, but what's going on out in the society, how people are feeling. So we have those organization therapy sessions, we have department, mental health sessions, and also leaders understand that during those one-on-ones, being able to not only immediately jump into meetings, asking people about work, but more so the person in general. How can I support you? We have now, things surrounding, time management. How can we better help you, on your everyday dealing with different tasks? We just had a meeting yesterday about just, email etiquette and tasks. Like when you reaching out, you may email someone on a weekend or something, but I think it's important to let them know, like, hey, you don't have to respond to this immediately, or, what's a good due date for you, on different items to relieve the stress on team members as well. But more so just working closely with the team members, seeing how we can provide as many resources and tools, and understanding that everyone is different as well. And leaders of the organization understand that everyone is kind of like the same operations on the basketball operations side. Like you can't treat Giannis, you know, he has you have to coach him differently from someone else. Everyone is tailored, you know, to in order for them to thrive in their own positions within themselves. So.
And I wanted to point out that as a takeaway, look around at the ways that things have been, systems, workplaces, environments, whatever, have been designed to give special treatment to cisgender heterosexual people, for example. Like, is there a bathroom labeled women with an icon wearing a dress? Because that affirms a cisgender female identity in very reductive iconography, but that's why it's there. So instead of, you know, like it's the default, but it sounds like, you know, you're talking about normalizing therapy, which is great. But when we get into those rooms with these diverse people who have all been pitted against each other, you know, I'm like, what can we bring it back to? How can we make sure that we're not perpetuating and looking down on others while we talk about our feelings? And I think that that's why a lot of people are afraid to talk when you get into those rooms. So I think, yeah, the first thing is setting up systems where we normalize therapy, we normalize talking about it, but also normalize pointing out the ways, not just that we are disadvantaged, but that things like sarcasm in the workplace are totally unnecessary and just there to be entertaining and comforting to neurotypical people. They're like your Christmas party, your office Christmas party that is to maybe evangelical Christians like considered pagan is still Christian. And are you, you know, are we aware of how these things that just seem like a default? You get work off for Christian holidays. This is not a Christian nation.
Sorry to interrupt. Rose, I want to get to one more question because what you're saying is right on target with it. I know Casey's going to interrupt me in a second and say we have questions. So my last question for Marlo and Rose are like, I know we talked a lot about things we can do, but what are some things like ways or examples of company policies that are not accommodating to neurodivergents or autistics?
Well, like I said about the sarcasm, I think a lot of these policies are not really written policies. And so like, yeah, we can attack legislation, we can attack written rules and standards, but one of the things about being autistic, yeah, I love rules, but most social codes aren't written rules. They're just tacit understandings. So I'm like, you have to examine what tacit understandings you already have. It takes me a lot longer. I can figure out what they are, but like neurotypical people who are unknowingly creating all of these social rules need to take a good hard look at them for us, because we can't always, I forget that they exist.
Mila, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the opposite of what Rose is talking about, just like explicit like expectations and policies that like can just be very difficult for neurodivergent people. For example, just like stuff that's like related to customer service at my work, you know, they're like 10-4, you know, you like make eye contact with people and then, you know, just like interact with them. And then like, you know, I don't know if we're all aware of this, but making eye contact as an autistic person is kind of freaking difficult. And just like having that be like an expectation or just like, I would always, when I began working at my current job, I would get like some measure of grief for just like being on the sales floor and just like not talking to anyone. That's also just like the selective mutism. Sometimes it's just like, I cannot speak to people. I can't explain why. I just like, it's very difficult to like interact with strangers in like a friendly way, be like, hey, it's just like, it's harder for me. But that's like expected because, you know, they want like a friendly, like, you know, environment. There's another thing too. there's a lot of like explicit expectations for like multitasking. And that like pertains more to like job roles that I would want to avoid now that like I'm like aware of just like how being autistic like affects me and like my skill set. But you know, like early on when I worked in like fast food and like people would be just like constantly like yelling at me for like forgetting to do this. Like I can like only like juggle like 3 things before just like my short-term memory kind of just like I completely forget just like the last thing I was doing. And then it's just like, oh yeah, okay. And that just like was not, it was a mess. But yeah, there's a lot of like just mechanical things and expectations that just like, I cannot do this. I'm so sorry. It just does not work for me.
And then for me as an ADHDer, I really, when you give me a bunch of things like the multitasking, it's harder for me to prioritize what needs to get done when. So I start doing everything at once. Generally, if there's a meeting with me, I preface it by saying, hey, if I change a topic in the middle of it, it's because I had a really good thought, but just interrupt me, remind me to come back. But it comes off as, oh, she's not very professional, or she's like, she can't focus, or she whatever, because I'm thinking of 5 million things at once. And Rose, like, when I talk to Rose, it's hard for me to be like, okay, wait, oh, I had a really good idea. And then I want to talk about this and jump over here. Or if I'm talking to Jakeem or Bridget or anyone, it's hard for me sometimes in that way.
Well, and we, in our own neurodivergent community and online and through these support services, we can share coping mechanisms and ways to manage anxiety, because even with accommodations, it's still hard being autistic. It's still hard having ADHD, and you don't want to lose those thoughts. So it's like, I compulsively write things down in a notebook a lot of the time. You know, it doesn't have to be about suppressing or restricting your natural impulses. I think that is something that's been ingrained in us, that we should try to fit a neurotypical mold. So like what Milo was saying and what John Nash was saying, it's like find where we fit, because we fit. And you know, like there are things, every person is going to be different, not only because there are 255 kinds of marginalized people according to this very small model that I made, but like we're all, it's systems work better when they are designed for individuals and the group, not just one idea of how all individuals should be as a group.
Okay, Casey, I don't want to run over time. Are there questions we need to answer?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Milo, Jakeem, Rose, Bridget, and to Emily. I do want to take just a few minutes here in the last few moments of the session to open up the floor. There was a few questions submitted ahead of time, but if anyone on the call right now has any questions that comes to mind, please feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. The folks are gathering their thoughts. I can read off one of the ones. I'll paraphrase a few that were submitted in advance. There were a few questions around this theme about for organizations that are trying to be better and are trying to be more inclusive and have these initiatives in place and are training their employees. How do you showcase that on the front lines? Whether you're posting job descriptions, going to career fairs, how do you demonstrate to potential candidates that you are a more inclusive space? Jakeem mentioned handing out literature about what to expect at a Bucks interview. What are some other phrases to include in job descriptions, phrases to avoid in job descriptions, other materials, anything like that to be really proactive?
I think for us, what we found is that companies are really reluctant to talk about their initiatives until they know they work. And we work a lot with our companies on like how to promote this. And I think it's all so connected, like you're saying, like career fairs. I think that I know I was working on the college side before I was on this end, and I know that when I was working with autistic college students and trying to help with supporting jobs, I was like, there's no transparency here. Like, I don't know how to connect you with these programs that exist. I think we're getting better at it, but I think that companies need to reach out to career centers, reach out to disability service centers on campuses, and reach out to professors. We actually know that there's been some like really initial research that like specifically autistic college students are like more likely to talk to their professors about jobs versus like career centers or disability services. So like go into the schools, go into do these like small things, like things that seem small to these big companies, but that are really crucial to do, and just advertise it. We do get a lot of it's really helpful for us when companies advertise this, because we're always trying to see candidates and get the word out. But like for us, like Bank of America is way better at like has way more of an audience than we do to advertise this. So I think it's just like really encouraging that Emily said, you know, there are becoming some more job boards that are more specific. I think Microsoft just did one too recently. So yeah, so things like that are awesome, but just like doing it also on a micro level, I think is something that is like so crucial. Word of mouth is so important. That's my thought.
Any final thoughts on that question before we wrap up?
I also just wanted to remind people to be real with themselves while they're doing that about all these other things. Be real with yourselves about why you have your job. You know, for me, maybe I feel like I worked really hard and fostered a relationship with a professor who encouraged me and all of that. But maybe I wouldn't have had that relationship with that professor if I were not a speaking autistic. Maybe I would not have that relationship with that professor if I were dark-skinned, maybe, or an immigrant, or transgender. I think this insistence that we've earned what we have is really at the root of a lot of issues. And yeah, that likability factor is a big part of it.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists again, and thank you, Emily, for facilitating today's call. Folks on the call, we are going to be sending out the link to the recording to anyone who registered for the event, as well as some resources that were provided in advance by our wonderful panelists. So thank you so much to everyone for joining the call today. I see that some folks are dropping their contact info in the chat, so take note of that. Other than that, we'll wrap up here, and thank you again so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Casey. Appreciate you.